welcome to the Club Life podcast. I'm Darren Flynn, the Chief Corporate Affairs Officer at Clubs New South Wales. And in this episode, we're going to talk to one of the most loved personalities in the Sydney hospitality scene. Dedes has more than 30 years of experience running restaurants, many of which can be found in registered clubs. And he's also an ambassador for Heart Kids and Heart Research Australia, organisations that are quite literally very close to his heart. So let's hear all about that and more from the man himself, the Managing Director of the Dedes Waterfront Group, Dedes. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here, Darren.
Now, you're one of Sydney's most renowned chefs and restaurateurs. How significant a role do registered clubs play getting you where you are today?
Most probably the most significant. I was lucky enough, blessed enough to grow up in one. So Mum and Dad had a wonderful venue or catering concession back in 1973 to 81. I'm a 1970 model, so spent the best part of my infancy there. And Mum and Dad had a beautiful restaurant called Dedes Restaurant, which was then known West Soccer Club. Started there in 81, so hence, it's been super formative.
Now, we're going to talk a bit more about both those venues in a moment, but first I'm going to put you on the spot. Can you name every registered club that you've been involved in over the years, whether you've worked there or had a restaurant there?
I can. So it'd be in double digits insofar as having involvement with, in regards to direct concessions, certainly with the Kerrie Club, with the old Kerrie RSL, which we kicked off there in 2001, Cronulla RSL. There was a short stint at Parramatta RSL. There was Sydney Rowing Club. And of course, recently now, the Regatta Club.
And of course, Alpha, and we're going to talk a little bit more about Alpha a bit later on. Now, you mentioned your parents briefly there. I suspect this question is going to focus on your parents. Where did your love of cooking come from?
Definitely Mum in the first instance. And then I got to work next to my father as a 15, 16-year-old. And that was definitely, and I say this with the utmost of respect, because Dad's in that beautiful restaurant up in the sky. That was a love-hate relationship, because working next to your dad and having the good and the bad that comes with that. But certainly Mum in the first instance, embryonic stages and somewhat, but Dad certainly galvanised it.
Now, let's talk about your parents' migration to Australia from Greece in the 1960s. Tell us about the experience for them and how they settled into their new home here in Sydney.
So Mum and Dad typically, and it's a horrible word to use typically, but in the late 60s came through, and Dad was a police officer in Greece but had to do some unschooled work when he first got here as a toolmaker in Homebush in a factory. But Mum could sing and still can, thankfully, but worked inordinate hours. So Mum worked in the late 60s in Greek nightclubs from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. And then apparently I'm adorned with having stuffed up her career, because I came along in 1970 and it got a bit hard to sort of like get into it after that. But Mum and Dad had a little fish and chip shop, again, typically. But Dad would pick up a shift down at the Sydney Rowing Club in the early 70s. And in 1973, God bless him, the contractor walked out. And John Turnbull, who I owe a lot to, my schooling career too, was the secretary manager at the time and went on to do fantastic things at Liverpool Catholic Club. Walked into the kitchen, said, "Hey, buddy, can you cook?" And my dad said, "Oh, bloody oath, I can cook." My dad would struggle to boil water at the time and he got on the blower to Mum, and the rest is history. And that's how they got their start.
And that was at Sydney Rowing Club?
Sydney Rowing Club, 1973.
So this is a club where you currently have an eatery. I mean, that must be a very special thing for you to actually run a restaurant in 2025 in a venue where your parents did exactly the same thing back in the 1970s.
Yeah, super special. It's over and above just a pragmatic kind of professional relationship. It's super personal for me as well. And I mentioned before that, Dad's passed, but Mum thankfully is still around. And it's been an absolute fantastic part of our whole portfolio for a very long time. This is year number 28 now in the second stint.
You're well known for your very strong work ethic. How much of that did you pick up from watching your parents in those very early days?
Yeah, no choice. It was certainly instilled in us through just watching Mum and Dad work, and then obviously doing it ourselves. An opportunity arose with Canterbury Bankstown Leagues Club back in the day, and the league club, the directorship, wanted Mum and Dad to go into that venue. And Dad recognised, and Mum and Dad recognised, that they were single venue operators. But because I'd grown up in it and been in the kitchen and worked on the floor, they said, "Look, we've got this young whippersnapper here. He's 19, have a crack." But the work ethic for mine back then was kind of like first in, last out. And I'm happy to say it. I was second guessing even my skill set, because, having our name on the door, I wanted to be making sure that it didn't matter if I was 21, that 16-hour days were just par for the course back then.
And of course, the club industry not only introduced you to your working life, but also to your wife.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I'm forever grateful at Canterbury Bankstown League Club because young Kerrie walked in the door and presented quite beautifully and still does. G'day, Kerrie. And I just was besotted by not only Kerrie herself, but the way that she'd move and be around. And then we, in 1993, decided to say g'day to each other, and the rest is definitely history. And now I can say, without a shadow of a doubt, if it wasn't for Kerrie, my life partner, my soulmate, that certainly what we've been able to achieve up until the present day, it's been an absolute pleasure to do it with my partner.
And you built your restaurant empire with Kerrie. Why is it such a successful partnership, and what's the secret to it?
Definitely no secret. I think that the ideals, the pillars of treating people like you want to be treated, the values of integrity, being humble, the humility piece, being fair income, we learn a lot along the way and stuffed up a lot along the way, but those pillars have stayed true, and it's been obviously the cornerstone of our success. But I've got a beautiful son called Stavros and a magnificent daughter called Georgia, but when Stavros was born in the year 2000, I said to Kerrie, Kez, you're not going to see me for a couple of years, because I just went out there and I knew that I just had to start systemising, I had to write things down, I had to get standard procedures happening. I needed to get it to the point where I wanted to be around for both Georgia and Stavros as they were growing up, and allow for the good and the bad that comes with not being in your business. So start working on your business.
How difficult is it to balance work and family life, particularly in the restaurant game?
In the early days, it was super tough. And up until I sort of like conditioned my mindset to allow and entrust and empower people, resource your people, and not have to be there, it was super tough, because it is a definite conditioning of your mindset. Because of the question that you asked me before, Darren, insofar as the way that you grew up and had mum and dad around you, they were doing 8 days a week and 100 odd hours, those ones. And it sounds like a flippant term, but conditioning your mindset is a lot harder than, than it sounds. It's being able to allow for and then actually put things into perspective and say, hey, would I be rather here, perhaps in a pool swimming around with your kids and Kerrie, or would I be in the middle of it on a Sunday lunch? At times it's an easier choice.
You talked earlier about working with your father in the kitchen, and perhaps he was a bit of a hard taskmaster. Have you had Georgia and Stavros in the kitchen at any stage in time, and what were you like as a boss?
Both kids started with us at 14 years and 9 months when they could, and now you can start a little bit earlier and whatnot. But I just wanted to instill in them, but through a different kind of like people and culture type of way, the work ethic more so. Certainly the way that HR or people and culture was handled back in the 70s and 80s is a lot different to the way it is now. And so hence generationally, you need to be very mindful of the way that you're talking to your whole brigades and your teams. So I wasn't that hard. And to be honest, it was great that there are multi-venues, and it would be a whole lot better that you let them stand on their own 2 feet, as opposed to Stavros going in and doing a shift and saying, oh shit, here comes Stav, he's the boss's son. No, let him go. I tried to be as arm's length, as was Kerrie.
You've got 8 venues now, over 400 employees. I think the thing that's immediately apparent to anyone who meets you is that people are very important to you, whether they're customers, other stakeholders or staff. Let's start with the staff. How do you ensure that you keep your staff happy? How do you maintain consistency with your workforce?
I think the absolute covenant is that you've got to be able to treat people, look at people in the eye and be fair income. It doesn't matter what trade you're in. So that's where you start. You start with, the way that I would like to be treated, the way that Kerrie would like to be treated. This is the way that we would want to instill that in our team members. Having said that, if you don't add proper training, product knowledge, if you don't add proper systems, if you don't add proper amenity, if you don't add proper resource, and it's all well and good for me to say, like Wayne Bennett said, employ someone, let them do their job and let them do their job, right? That's all well and good, but you've got to empower your team. You cannot undermine your team. That's an art in itself. And then resource your team to let them do their role. So there's the interpersonal side of making the emotional connections with your team. And then there's the structural side of making sure that you've resourced them, that you've got everything in place for them to be able to do their role.
Okay, so that's how you deal with staff. What about your other stakeholders, your customers, for example? Food's obviously critical to the Dedes Waterfront Group brand, but what about that personal connection? How important are people?
Richard Branson said, you've got to look after your own people, your own team members, your own staff. But it's certainly a developed print or a dead heat for second when it comes to your guests, right? But within that trifecta also too is your other stakeholders. So, there's your landlords, there's your partners, there's your delivery drivers and whatnot. Our modus operandi is obviously to be profitable, because if we weren't profitable, we wouldn't be able to sustain and maintain, right, within our venues. Having said that, anyone that walks to the door, it's amazing what can come from a cup of coffee, for instance. So people first, your team members first, your clients or your guests second, but as I said, a developed print or a dead heat, and then all the other stakeholders within your business.
And is that the key to your success?
Definitely. It's doing this. It's being able to chat. It's being able to, make those emotional connections. It's about when a guest comes into your workplace, in this case, it is a hospitality venue where we try and make memories for people. It's about those intangibles. It's about that X factor. Yeah, your food's got to stand. It needs to be expedient, come out quickly, fresh, hot, seasonal, all the rest of it, the music's on point and whatnot, but all those are the sum of the whole. And the sum of the whole, when you're making emotional connections with people, we'll go, oh, okay, shit, that was pretty cool. I'll be back here.
You're a very proud Greek Australian. How proud were you to take ownership of Alpha, one of the most renowned dining establishments in Sydney, run by the Hellenic Club? How big a moment was it for you in 2024 when you took over the reins at Alpha?
Yeah, super cool. So vivid memories of the Hellenic Club Level 5 and going up there with Dad and being served by fantastic human beings that, a beautiful Greek salad, and spending time with my father and smashing a lamb shoulder and whatnot. But when the opportunity arose, whilst it wasn't within our unique selling proposition, it's Dedes Waterfront Group, I just felt, because of the elements of the business, the way that it stood, the Greek heritage of it certainly resonated. It was a commercial decision, but it's an added intangible bonus to be able to have the stewardship of the Hellenic Club as our landlords there, and for Kerrie, myself and our team around us to be able to punch out just fantastic hospitality in such a wonderful venue.
Does it add a little bit of extra pressure though? You're obviously well tapped into the Greek community. Alpha is a key meeting spot for that group. They love their food. How much pressure does that put on you?
Yeah, I bandied this term about stakeholder management. The stakeholder management there is one where if I do meet someone of the same type of Greek heritage and whatnot, we start talking in a different language per se, and I need to be careful that I don't undermine our teams insofar as being very giving and that generosity of spirit, which is inherent within the Greek way and the philotimo and the other Greek ideals that we've got within our own fabric. But yeah, there is an added little bit of pressure, which is cool. Bring it on.
So that's Alpha, but you've also got the Regatta Club, which is at the old Haberfield Rowers venue, Sydney Rowing Club, which we've mentioned, and the Cruising Yacht Club of Australia, which is another iconic venue, not just for people here in Sydney, but around Australia, the home of the Sydney to Hobart yacht race. What's so appealing about opening venues in clubs?
We used to call them a sleeping giant. Now they've certainly awoken. It's great that we've been able to compete with all the other hospitality venues that we've got Australia-wide. I think because inherently I might be a people person, that there's, in any club in New South Wales, of which there's, Darren help me out here, about 1,400, 1,300 registered clubs. There's 40-odd thousand people that are employed with them. They're regional. There's, the figure's about 5.5 million members or so. You can walk into a registered club and not know who you're talking to, from where they're from, what they're doing and whatnot. And so I think the attraction there is, I grew up in them, but I can also see that because there's inherent commercial benefits of being within a registered club as well. And I think we've just gone on with that. So that's probably the best way to answer that question.
You mentioned the commercial benefits there, and I think it's never been more important because it's getting increasingly difficult to generate a profit from food. Tell us how hard it actually is to make money in the restaurant game.
I mean, that's definitely true. So hence, if you're netting out properly when it comes to food, you need one of two things. You obviously need some frequency to be coming through, or, some decent gross to be coming through to be able to sustain the cost of doing business. And one of the advantages that we have as a group is being able to put to a fair extent, to a very fair extent, downward pressure on some of our inputs, one being food and beverage. I mean, beverage is not one which is an immediate default within registered clubs, but thankfully it is loosening up a bit. And it's great to see that registered club CEOs are warming to the fact that let's get commercial here, as opposed to once upon a time where catering concessions were subsidised. But certainly to be netting out properly, even at double-digit type net profit out of just food, yeah, you need to be motoring.
Of the 4 clubs that you're currently operating out of, they're all very different in terms of their demographics and location. Is the one-size-fits-all approach? I'm guessing not.
Definitely not. So hence the different brands. So we've got a water grill down at the Sydney Rowing Club. We've rebadged the UTS Rowing Club as a regatta club. The Cruising Yacht Club of Australia have got their own casual, it's premium casual catering concession. You just can't cut and paste. Absolutely not. You know, there's a demography piece that plays a role. And even when once upon a time we had 3 water grills in the market, one at Cronulla, one at Kirribilli and one at Abbotsford, and still continues to be at Abbotsford, there were different nuances within the menu offer or the offer that would be adapting towards our inherent demography there and our membership base.
How much has club dining changed since those early days of your involvement back in the 70s with Mum and Dad at Sydney Rowing Club?
Thankfully, it's world's best practice. I mean, I unashamedly would go out there, Darren, and say to you that you can go to most registered clubs in New South Wales and get fare, as in food and beverage fare, which is world's best practice. So once upon a time, it was certainly different. You know, you could have a good chef that could construct a really good sauce and maybe mask an average piece of protein. But today, that doesn't happen because the guest, our member, our visitor, is a whole lot more informed, and you just don't get away with it. So unless you're industry best practice, world's best practice at what you're doing, you're not going to sustain.
You've been a big supporter of the Your Local Club Perfect Plate Awards since they started 5 years ago now. The competition's coming up. Why is it so important to celebrate club food and make sure people know that if you walk into a registered club, you're going to get food served up in many instances as good as anywhere else in Sydney?
I think it's a fantastic initiative for many reasons, but the first reason I always default to is our team. So to have our team construct something and be in something which is essentially being judged by our members and guests is a fantastic thing and breaks up the day-to-day. That's the first thing. The second thing is it adds diversity to the menu card for our members and guests, and it gets the promo as it rightly should and competes against licensed hotels and obviously high street restaurants as well. But it's super important. It's a great initiative and we're thankful to be part of it.
Away from clubs, away from food, you were born with a congenital heart issue. How has that impacted your life? And can you tell us a bit more about the work you've done with Heart Kids and Heart Research Australia?
That's nice. Look, it didn't know any different, Darren. I was born with it. So, you know, I couldn't run a marathon when I was a youngster and whatnot, but open heart surgery in 1976. In 76, I didn't know any better. It was ice cream on a hospital bed, you know, in Camperdown for 20-odd days. But in 99, you're a little bit more of your mortality. And when a doc says to you, see this little metal valve, I'm going to whack it into you. And because you've got a small little tear in your aortic valve and all the rest of it, it kind of like resonated a little bit more. Being able to try and give back, both Kerrie and I have are blessed that I'm now an ambassador for Heart Kids and for Heart Research Australia. And, you know, there's things that all of us do under the radar that no one needs to know about, but we do have forums within our restaurants so we could get the advocacy piece out. And February was a really big month for us insofar as a Heart Kid initiative and a Heart Research Australia initiative, because it is Heart Awareness Month. And so there's various things that we can do within our platforms, within our hospitality venues, which not only spreads the advocacy piece, but also can generate $1 or $2 and we can give back. And to see where those dollars go and what can be done now with heart health is pretty inspiring.
It's such a worthy initiative. It must have been a very trying time for your parents. And in 1976, having open heart surgery when you're 5 or 6 years old, have they ever talked to you about the impact it had on them at that point in time?
They haven't openly talked to me about it, but when I met someone in, so it was 2003 at the Sydney Rowing Club from Heart Kids, and I asked them, what did they do? And they said, Con, we just give support. Immediately, that resonated with me. I know that if Heart Kids was around and they sort of like had a line into Mum and Dad and just had a chat to them, It wouldn't have made it, I don't think, mentally much easier, but at least there was someone else to chat to. So that's why it super resonated with me insofar as the support piece for people around people going through that affliction.
You've had plenty of famous people come and eat at your restaurants over the years. I want to talk to you about the Fordham family. Ben Fordham is obviously an individual that's got a very strong link with registered clubs. We've been involved with his program on 2GB for many years, as have you. But I want to talk to you about Ben's father, John. Anyone who knew John, he was a very impressive figure in Sydney media and in wine circles for such a long period of time. Tell me about how John played into your success as a restaurateur.
Oh, I've got to say, he's a special human. So blessed to meet John back in... I didn't know who John Fordham was up until, I'd say, it was the late 90s down at the Sydney Rowing Club, and I happened to notice 4 gentlemen on a table at lunch, and I was on the tools on that day, serving them, and they did really, really well insofar as, a really nice luncheon. And they were having such a good time. I got to about 4 o'clock, and I didn't know at the time, but Mr. Fordham asked, do you mind if we hang around for dinner? I said, sir, you can hang around for the next 3 years, no problem at all. And we exchanged details, and we opened up Flying Fish, which was at the end of Jones Bay Wharf back in the day in 2003. And John was good enough through his own company and the clients to be able to support us. And I've never, ever, ever forgotten that. And he'd come down and be an absolute gentleman, as his guests were, and I've never forgotten the support. And through that, got to meet Veronica, Ben, Nick and Sarah, and they were just wonderful, wonderful humans. And it just so happened that Ben was doing what Ben was doing, and away we went. And I'm forever thankful for the relationship. Great family.
Let's talk about Dedes away from work. What do you do to relax? What do you do to fill your leisure time?
Apparently, I play golf a little bit too much. So, look, I'm happy just to, on any given afternoon, go out and hit 5 or 6 holes worth of golf, just trying to zone in on trying to get this ball somewhere close to some hole. And then after I finish, maybe just have a beer and just chill out, go home, chat to Kerrie. Kerrie and I, we've got a special relationship because we've worked together and lived together and had an awesome life together for the last 30-odd years. So I'm super blessed that, I still get that little tingle when I see Kerrie when I get home and whatnot. So, yeah, look, I don't do too much. I'm pretty cruisy. It's our biz, it's Kerrie, it's the kids, it's hitting the golf ball. Yeah, keep it simple and just keep working on that fish and chips.
Do you travel much?
Yeah, as much as we can. So we were blessed enough to be able to have the opportunity to get to with the kids. So we started in earnest when Stavros was about 10, and obviously Georgia was about 8, and away we went. So we did bits and bobs. So went out to the US and went back to Greece, which was wonderful. And yeah, we have travelled a little bit as best as we can in the shorter stints, 3-4 weeks here, 3-4 weeks there.
Okay, a couple of questions that we ask all of our guests to wrap things up, starting with your favourite movie. Is there a movie that sticks out in the memory bank as being your absolute go-to?
You know what? For me, it's The Great Escape, because I was born in the 70s and wanted to see Steve McQueen on that bike and Charles Bronson tunnelling and all the rest of it. Yeah, just a fantastic movie, The Great Escape. I don't know what inherently the message there is, but I just love seeing that movie, even though they didn't really escape, did they, at the end? But anyway.
Escape, but they didn't get away.
Yeah, they escaped, but yeah, that's right. Yeah, shit.
Amazing movie, such a fantastic story and obviously a true story as well.
Absolutely.
I'm going to ask this next question in 2 ways because you are yourself a chef. What's the best meal you've ever cooked? And what's the best meal you've ever tasted that someone else has prepared for you?
I'm not a chef. So I grew up next to my father, and so I'm not a qualified chef. And my dad himself wasn't a chef, and he got to learn by just trial and error. So he would construct a jus or a roux or a foundation sauce and whatnot, and if it wasn't to taste, he'd be spilling. But he got to learn. So Dad was doing it for 30-odd years and whatnot. So when it comes to cooking, I love cooking. And Kerrie's an awesome cook as well, but I tend to want to cook at home as well. So I started off at the Sydney Rowing Club in the kitchen, but we would be working to a formula there. So as a signature dish, Dedes doesn't have a signature dish. But I certainly would know how to get in there and have a crack.
It is an interesting distinction, isn't it? Because you'll often hear cooks say, look, I'm a cook, I'm not a chef. Do you feel like not being a qualified chef or a trained chef gives you a little bit more freedom in the kitchen?
No, because, I've been blessed to work with some unbelievably stunningly qualified chefs. You know, you need a modicum of skill set. I was saying this morning to one of our team members, before you want to deviate from your craft or your discipline and whatnot, you've got to be able to nail the foundation pieces, right? It doesn't matter what it is, right? So you've got to be able to know the basics, the 101s, the constructing of an omelette, whatever the case may be, right? Seasoning ratios and stuff like that. You've got to be able to do that. So often is the case, though, Darren, that it's the people that you don't hear about that make our beautiful chefs look like rock stars. It's the people behind, in front, aligned, on the pass that make our front people, our chefs, look great. And they often don't get the kudos that they deserve. The chef de parties, the demi-chefs, the ones that are grinding hard out the back, so cooks or chefs.
All right, I'm going to ask that question then a slightly different way, and we'll leave your venues out of it. But you and Kerrie are going out for dinner. Where are you going, and what meal are you going to order?
Believe it or not, our favourite restaurant as a family is Apollo, run by fantastic human beings who just opened up Olympus as well, 2 direct competitors to Alpha, so hopefully the chairman of the Hellenic Club isn't listening. But so we'll go to Apollo because it's vibey, it's buzzing, the food is always, it's on point. It's been there for 12 years and whatnot. But I have been blessed enough over the years now with Kerrie to be able to dine in some of the really beautiful venues, not only in Oz, but around the world and whatnot. But for us now, it's about, going out with Darren, Josh, Michelle, whatever, your company, and just being with people. I will sit in a restaurant and just chill. You inherently will pick up on things, but you overtly don't want to be in that type of work zone because it's my discipline, because then it's not fair for the people that are around you. But yeah, Apollo for us is a standout restaurant.
All right, one final question before we go, and this is a question we ask everyone as we sign off. Why do you think registered clubs will still be around in 100 years' time?
Yeah, I think that they're going to evolve, and they've started to evolve brilliantly now insofar as the structural piece around them. So some of the legislative pieces are starting to become more contemporary. They definitely are, for most country towns, for most regional centres, for Sydney themselves, are places where if you just, want to go in for a lemon squash and have a chat, you can. Play some cards, you can. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is that clubs will always be there for people that want to do whatever they want to do. If they want to have an awesome feed, they can. If they want to just go and have a chat, they can. If they want to just go have a look at the water and the view, they can. If they just want to sit there and not be bothered by someone, they can. So I think there will always be a place for registered clubs.
Con, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. Thanks for making the time, and we'll see you at Alpha, the Regatta Club, the Cruising Yacht Club of Australia, or Sydney Rowing Club. Thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Darren.
Con Dedes there, Managing Director of the Dedes Waterfront Group. And that's all we have time for in today's episode of the ClubLIFE podcast. Thanks for listening. If you're a new listener, don't forget you can listen to our back catalogue of interviews. Catch up on clublife.com.au, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you're consuming this podcast. Search ClubLIFE podcast to find us, and make sure you subscribe so you never miss a new episode. If you have a suggestion on who might make an interesting guest, get in touch with the team by emailing clublife@clubsnsw.com.au. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.